Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. The Galactic Council's most restricted substances registry had exactly one entry categorized as both Class A addictive narcotic and biological weapon of mass destruction. It wasn't some exotic compound engineered in the dark laboratories of extinct civilizations. It wasn't a synthetic neurotoxin developed during the Orion conflicts. It was adrenaline, a substance that flowed naturally through the veins of every human being. Council President Exav didn't know this yet, and studied the classified clearance documents in his private chamber, his 8 tentacle-like appendages of hair moving independently as he contemplated the significance of what lay ahead. This would be his first visit to the classified archives, an unprecedented level of access granted only to those who held his office. His oblong, streamlined cranium, evolved to reduce water resistance in his species' oceanic past, gleamed softly under the light. The pale, bluish tint of his skin appeared slightly dry in anticipation of the climate-controlled facility he would soon enter. He adjusted his formal attire, straightening the symbol of his newly elected position with a sense of purpose. "Now or never," he murmured to himself, a mantra that had carried him through his campaign. The rumors he'd heard about certain recently admitted species to the galactic community had piqued his curiosity. The humans, in particular, seemed to generate an unusual level of classified intelligence. Today, he would discover why. As his transport glided toward the imposing structure of the Galactic Archives, Exav mentally prepared himself for what awaited. The facility resembled utilitarian industrial data centers, massive, austere, and heavily fortified. Its imposing framework loomed against the skyline, a perfect example of the value the Council placed on information security. The biometric verification station marked the first barrier to entry. Exav pressed his tentacle tips against DNA readers that sampled his genetic material, uncomfortably aware of the invasive nature of the procedure. Despite his rank, there would be no exceptions to protocol.
"Retinal scan next, Mr. President,"
announced the security officer, a stern-faced being whose species specialized in security operations. Exav positioned himself before the scanner, fighting his natural instinct to shift and move. For a semi-aquatic species accustomed to constant fluid motion, holding perfectly still represented its own form of torture. The harsh blue light penetrated his eye, mapping the unique patterns that would confirm his identity. As he waited, he caught fragments of conversation between 2 guards stationed nearby.
"Latest briefing on the human problem. Heard they're expanding their settlement on Proxima. Council still divided on containment protocols."
The scanner completed its work with a soft chime, and Exav straightened, his interest heightened by what he'd overheard. The human problem? Containment protocols? These were terms typically reserved for biological hazards, not diplomatic partners. Beyond the biometric station, a more personalized form of security awaited. Senior archivists, beings whose entire career were dedicated to protecting the galaxy's most sensitive information, approached with evident skepticism despite his rank.
"Purpose of visit?"
demanded the lead archivist, a tall figure whose translucent skin revealed the complex network of data implants beneath.
"Presidential review of classified species data,"
Exav replied, presenting multiple forms of identification and authorization. His tentacle hair shifted into a formal pattern, conveying respect while asserting authority. The archivist studied the credentials with meticulous attention, then leaned closer to Exav.
"Be cautious when accessing biological anomalies in certain species files,"
she warned, her voice barely above a whisper.
"There have been incidents."
"Incidents?"
Exav's cranial tentacles curled with curiosity.
"Species who learned certain biological truths and suffered catastrophic social collapse as a result."
Her expression darkened.
"Knowledge can be destabilizing, Mr. President."
The warning only strengthened Exav's determination. If knowledge existed that could trigger societal collapse, then that knowledge required presidential scrutiny. His reform agenda depended on transparency, however uncomfortable that transparency might become. After passing through multiple secured doors, each requiring different verification methods, Exav finally reached the central terminal room. The space stretched before him, filled with computer systems and outdated interfaces deliberately maintained for security reasons. Modern quantum networks could be compromised. These isolated, antiqued systems could not. Massive cooling systems constantly made noise, maintaining optimal temperatures for the sensitive equipment. The harsh fluorescent lighting created a sterile, institutional atmosphere that made Exav's skin tighten uncomfortably in the dry air. Several technicians monitored system performance, their attention fixed on diagnostics displays. They looked up as Exav entered, their expressions shifting from surprise to careful neutrality.
"I require privacy,"
Exav announced, his tone making clear this was not a request but a presidential directive. The technicians exchanged glances before reluctantly complying. "Systems are functioning within parameters, Mr. President," one reported before departing. "The emergency protocols are active if you require assistance." As the room emptied, Exav surveyed the terminals. His gaze settled on one specifically labeled Biological Contraband and Controlled Substances. The designation seemed odd. Biological contraband typically referred to invasive species or prohibited organic compounds, not data about galactic citizens. Exav settled before the terminal, his tentacle hair moving with anticipation as he accessed the Controlled Substances database. The security system required multiple authentication steps, each more intrusive than the last, before finally displaying its contents. At the top of the list, classified with the highest restriction level possible, was adrenaline. The entry categorized it as both an addictive drug and a weapon of mass destruction, classifications normally reserved for the most dangerous compounds in the galaxy. Exav's tentacle hair froze in shock, then spread wide in disbelief. Adrenaline? Why would it warrant such extreme classification? He delved deeper, accessing historical data that revealed 3 civilizations that had collapsed after exposure to synthetic adrenaline. The SETI Collective, the Parlox Republics, and the Tsarn Confederation, all destroyed within a single generation of discovering how to synthesize the compound. Clinical reports detailed how the substance triggered aggressive fight responses, while simultaneously activating pleasure centers in the brain. The combination had proven catastrophic. Video evidence showed test subjects becoming violent, then experiencing euphoria, then demanding more of the drug when the effects subsided. The pattern led to societal breakdown, with citizens turning against each other in drug-fueled rages. Exav navigated to related files, following the data trail with growing unease. What he discovered sent his tentacle hair writhing in shock. Humans, a species from a distant yellow star system, naturally produced adrenaline in their bloodstream. The terminal displayed detailed footage of humans in emergency situations, performing incredible feats of strength, moving with extraordinary speed, enduring conditions that would incapacitate other species. Medical scans accompanying the footage showed massive adrenaline surges during these events. Yet, inexplicably, the humans showed no addiction, no homicidal tendencies. After each adrenaline rush subsided, they simply returned to normal functioning. A security assessment labeled humans as potential biological weapons, yet mysteriously stable. A contradiction that made Exav's skin wrinkle with frustration. Further research revealed the detailed medical reports comparing synthetic adrenaline's effects on various species with the natural adrenaline produced by humans. The differences were subtle but significant. Slight variations in molecular structure, different release mechanisms, complementary hormones that humans produce simultaneously. Exav leaned back from the terminal, his mind considering the implications. The diplomatic files showed that the decision to classify this information had been made hastily during human admission to the galactic community, without thorough scientific review. The previous administration had enacted the classification citing abundant caution and potential threat containment, but the data suggested something else entirely. Not a threat, but perhaps an evolutionary marvel. Were humans dangerous, or was their biology simply different? Did they represent a threat to galactic security, or a scientific curiosity that fear had transformed into something sinister? Exav considered his options carefully. Standard protocol would be to maintain the classification, to treat humans with the caution suggested by their files. But his campaign had promised reform, transparency, truth, and cooperation. His tentacle hair moved in agitated patterns as he came to a decision. He would need to speak with a human directly, not through the usual diplomatic channels, but in private, candid conversation. He needed to understand what it meant to live with a substance in one's veins that had destroyed 3 civilizations. He pulled up the communication interface and began drafting a formal summons for a human representative. This decision could define his presidency, either as the beginning of a new era of understanding, or a catastrophic mistake that confirmed humanity's danger. The facility's climate control system cycled again, sending another blast of cold air through the room. Exav suppressed a shiver, his semi-aquatic physiology protesting the dry environment. The discomfort only strengthened his resolve. Discomfort was temporary. Ignorance was dangerous. His fingers moved decisively across the control panel as he crafted the summons. He requested a human with military experience, someone who would have faced situations requiring adrenaline management. As he completed the document, Exav paused to consider the potential consequences of his actions. The political risks were enormous. If humans were indeed dangerous, inviting one directly to him bypassed numerous safety protocols. If they weren't, then his administration had inherited a policy of discrimination based on unfounded fear. Either way, the truth needed to emerge. His tentacle hair moved nervously as he finalized the summons, each appendage reflecting his inner turmoil. The potential for galactic panic if word spread about humans' natural biology, his political future hanging on whether this decision proved wise or catastrophic, the uncertainty about whether humans were even aware of their unique biological classification. With a decisive gesture, Exav transmitted the summons. There would be no turning back now. For better or worse, he had just set in motion events that could reshape the galactic community's understanding of humanity, and possibly of evolution itself. As the confirmation of transmission appeared on the screen, Exav felt the weight of his decision. Were humans to be feared or learned from? The answer waited in the bloodstream of the representative who would soon stand before him, unaware that their very biology had been classified as a weapon of mass destruction. 5 days later, the presidential chamber had been carefully prepared for this unprecedented meeting. Exav had personally selected the smooth marble table at its center, appreciating how its polished surface reminded him of underwater formations from his homeworld. The environment controls had been adjusted to increase humidity levels, not enough to make the human uncomfortable, but sufficient to ease the constant dryness that plagued Exav's semi-aquatic skin in standard atmospheric conditions. Large viewing screens adorned the walls, currently displaying real-time galactic news and data streams that Exav monitored from the corner of his eye. The elegant yet utilitarian design of the chamber reflected his practical approach to governance.
This meeting is ill-advised, Mr. President.
Strategy advisor X-Nox's voice carried the sharp edge of disapproval as he paced behind Exav. Unlike the president, X-Nox's appearance showed fewer of their species' aquatic traits. His sleek, perfectly groomed form and more terrestrial features suggested generations of generic drift away from the majority of their species.
The previous administration classified human biological data for a good reason.
Exav remained seated at the marble table, reviewing human physiological data on the secure tablet. His tentacle hair moved in patterns indicating thoughtful consideration rather than the agitation X-Nox clearly hoped to provoke.
And what reason was that, exactly?
Exav asked without looking up.
The files contain speculation and fear, not a scientific assessment. They're walking biological hazards,
Exnock insisted, his pacing growing more agitated.
Their biologies produce and distribute a substance that destroyed 3 advanced civilizations. They're essentially junkies who inject adrenaline for thrills.
Exav finally looked up, his tentacle hair shifting into a pattern that signaled mild rebuke.
A species that evolved with this compound cannot be compared to those who artificially introduced it. Evolution is not an addiction, Exnock. The previous administration classified this information for good reason.
The chamber door chimed, interrupting Exnock's argument.
The human representative has arrived, Mr. President,
announced the security team. Exav straightened, tentacle hair smoothing into a formal arrangement.
Perfect timing. Send him in.
Exnock retreated to a position silently behind and to the side of Exav, his posture rigid with disapproval. Even without seeing his advisor's face, Exav could sense the calculating analysis beginning, looking for weakness, vulnerabilities, anything that might justify terminating this meeting. This was when the doors slid open and the human entered. Exav's first impression was one of alien strangeness. Thomas moved with a peculiar rigidity compared to the fluid motions of Exav's species. His skin, exposed on his face and hands, had a uniform texture unlike the gradient patterns common to most aquatic species. Most notably, he lacked any visible adaptive appendages like tentacle hair or sensitive filaments, giving his head a strangely smooth, static appearance. Despite these alien features, Thomas carried himself with a professional military bearing that Exav recognized across species boundaries. His uniform bore minimal decorations, suggesting a focus on function rather than ceremonial display, a preference Exav shared. The president rose, his tentacle hair moving in patterns of welcome.
Representative Thomas, thank you for accepting my invitation. I am Council President Exav.
Thomas offered a formal bow that showed familiarity with interspecies protocol. The honor is mine, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity for direct dialogue. Exnock remained motionless, offering neither greeting nor acknowledgement.
Please, be seated.
Exav gestured to the chair across from him.
I hope your journey was comfortable?
Quite smooth, Thomas replied, taking the offered seat with practiced ease. Your transportation systems are remarkably efficient. Exav noticed how the human's eyes, another alien feature with their single-color iris surrounded by white, moved systematically around the room, perhaps cataloguing exits, equipment, and positions. Military training, most likely, not paranoia.
You must have found our world quite different from Earth,
Exav commented, genuinely curious about the human perspective. Different, yes, but fascinating, Thomas smiled. A human expression Exav had studied but still found slightly disconcerting, with its exposure of dental structures. Your presidential palace is quite nice.
I was even nicer before I took office, Exav explained. The previous president had a fondness for grand displays.
Exnock chose this moment to interject.
He was a great leader, and perhaps the greatest we ever had.
Thomas turned slightly to acknowledge Exnock. Nice to meet you too. The quick reasoning from Thomas impressed Exav.
Let me introduce a strategy advisor, Exnock,
Exav said, belatedly handling the formality Exnock had deliberately avoided.
He served the previous administration and provides historical context for current decisions.
A pleasure, Advisor Exnock, Thomas offered. Exnock inclined his head slightly, the minimum acceptable acknowledgement.
You seem remarkably comfortable in an alien environment, Representative Thomas. Does nothing disturb your equilibrium?
Exav recognized the question's true intent, probing for stress triggers that might induce an adrenaline response. Thomas smiled again, apparently not bothered by the question. My training included extensive exposure to unfamiliar environments. Exav decided to redirect the conversation before Exnock could continue his probing.
I've invited you here to discuss something of a delicate nature. Representative Thomas, it concerns human biology, specifically. Certain compounds your species produces naturally.
Thomas's expression shifted subtly, showing interest rather than concern. I'm not a medical specialist, Mr. President, but I'll assist however I can.
This relates more to diplomatic classification than medical expertise,
Exav clarified. His tentacle hair moved in a slight agitation as he formulated his next words carefully.
I recently discovered that for a substance your body produces naturally, adrenaline, has been classified as both a controlled narcotic and a potential weapon by the Galactic Council.
Exav watched closely for Thomas's reaction. Surprise registered in the widening of his eyes and slight tension in his posture, but not alarm or offense. That's, unexpected, Thomas said after a moment. Adrenaline is just a stress hormone for us. It increases heart rate and respiration during emergencies or physical exertion.
For other species who've synthesized it, the effects have been far more dramatic and destructive,
Exav explained.
3 civilizations collapsed after introducing synthetic adrenaline to their populations. It triggered aggression, addiction, and societal breakdown.
Thomas processed this information with remarkable composure. I had no idea. This classification wasn't mentioned during Earth's admission to the galactic community.
The classification is itself classified,
Exav said, his tentacle hair shifting in patterns indicating ironic amusement.
A rather strange security protocol, wouldn't you agree?
Weird, no doubt, Thomas observed carefully. Exnock moved forward, unable to remain silent.
Or perhaps designed to prevent panic about a species that naturally manufactures a dangerous substance.
Rather than taking offense, Thomas appeared thoughtful. I understand the concern, but there must be physiological differences in how humans process adrenaline compared to other species. We've lived with it for our entire evolutionary history, without society-wide addiction or collapse. Exav's tentacle hair moved in a pattern of approval. The human grasped the scientific question immediately, without defensiveness.
Precisely the question I wish to explore,
Exav said.
Which brings me to a proposal.
He paused, choosing his words with care.
I would like to conduct comparative physical tests to better understand the human capabilities, specifically how adrenaline functions in your system versus how synthetic versions affect other species.
Exnock stiffened visibly. This went beyond the informational meeting he'd reluctantly accepted. Thomas didn't immediately respond, taking time to consider the request. What kind of tests did you have in mind?
Non-invasive monitoring during athletic competition, Exav explained. Nothing that would cause discomfort or violate your physical autonomy. I believe we should also include blood sampling and tissue analysis,
Exnock interjected.
For a complete scientific accuracy.
Exav's tentacle hair flared in obvious displeasure.
We will conduct no invasive procedures. Representative Thomas is a diplomatic guest, not a research subject.
Thomas watched this exchange with evident interest. I have no objection to non-invasive monitoring, Mr. President.
Excellent,
Exav responded, his tentacle hair settling back into a pleased arrangement.
A combat simulation could be arranged,
Exav said, his tentacle hair moving in a pattern that indicated both surprise and approval.
If you are willing, Representative Thomas.
I am, Thomas confirmed. I am also curious about the secrecy, and if understanding human stress responses better will improve interspecies relations, I'm at your disposal. Exnock's expression darkened, but he offered no further objection. Instead, he stepped away slightly, activating his personal communication device with a subtle gesture he thought concealed from observation. Exav noticed the movement, filing the observation away for future consideration. For now, his focus remained on the remarkable data collected, and the even more remarkable human who had provided it. Less than a full hour later, the high-tech virtual reality chamber for military training had been prepared on Exnock's insistence. Despite his apparent skepticism toward Thomas, he demonstrated surprising enthusiasm for arranging the combat simulation, personally selecting the elite security force who would serve as opponents. Thomas stood at the center of the preparation area, allowing technicians to attach additional monitoring devices to his body. These sensors could detect minute changes in blood chemistry, neural activity, and muscular response.
The simulation would test decision-making under pressure,
explained the lead technician, and being who specialized appendages moved with precision as he calibrated the equipment.
The scenario involves tactical assessment, threat neutralization, and civilian protection.
Thomas nodded, inspecting the VR interface with professional interest. Similar to our combat simulations on Earth, though your haptic feedback systems appear more advanced. Exav observed from a monitoring station, his tentacle hair moving in patterns indicating curiosity. This test would reveal cognitive response under more intense stress, the precise area where other species had experienced catastrophic effects from synthetic adrenaline. Exnov entered, his expression carefully neutral.
Everything prepared to your satisfaction, Representative Thomas?
Yes, thank you for arranging this. The simulation began with a tactical shooting scenario. Virtual civilians appeared scattering through an urban environment, with hostile entities emerging at irregular intervals. Thomas moved decisively, his weapon handling and positioning demonstrating trained expertise.
Initial adrenaline response beginning,
reported one scientist, indicating a graph that showed steadily rising levels.
Heart rate elevated but controlled.
Thomas eliminated 3 virtual threats in rapid succession, each requiring split-second discrimination between civilian and hostile targets. His accuracy was impressive, but more remarkable was his decision speed.
Cognitive processing time decreases as adrenaline increases,
noted another scientist with evident fascination.
Directly opposite to patterns observed in other species exposed to synthetic versions.
The simulation intensified, introducing multiple simultaneous threats in complex patterns. Thomas adapted immediately, prioritizing targets based on threat level and civilian proximity. His movements became more fluid, his responses faster. Exav noticed Exnock slip quietly from the observation room, communication device in hand. His suspicion, already aroused by Exnock's earlier behavior, deepened. After Thomas completed the simulation with remarkable efficiency, Exav announced,
I believe I've seen enough to make an informed decision. The classification of human biology requires immediate revision, and adrenaline is not a drug for you. I'll convene an emergency council session to present these findings.
Exnock moved forward, alarm briefly visible before his features smoothed into diplomatic concern.
Mr. President, I must strongly advise against such hasty action. The previous administration had substantial reasons. The previous administration is no more,
Exav interrupted, authority evident in his posture.
These tests demonstrate humans aren't biological weapons, but simply different evolutionary paths.
Exnock's composure slipped momentarily.
Some secrets protect us all. You'll regret this decision.
With that ominous statement, he departed alone, his movements stiff with obvious anger as he left. After concluding their discussion with the scientific team, Exav suggested they continue their conversation in his presidential offices. Thomas agreed, and they left the observation room together, making their way through the facility. Exav noted that Exnock had not returned after his abrupt exit, unusual behavior for someone typically insistent on overseeing all diplomatic interactions. As they walked, They discussed the implications of the test results, with Exav explaining some of his administration's reform initiatives. Their conversation flowed easily until they reached the high-tech corridor connecting the training facilities to the main complex. Exav and Thomas were walking through the corridor when Exav noticed something wrong. The security personnel stationed at regular intervals had abandoned their posts. And that was not all. Suddenly, 4 guards appeared ahead, blocking their path. The president immediately noted the unusual vacancy in their expressions, and the unnatural redness surrounding their pupils.
"Explain yourselves," Exav demanded. "Why have you left your assigned positions?"
The guards remained silent, their movements slightly jerky as they advanced.
"An unfortunate necessity,"
came Exnok's voice from behind them. The advisor stepped from a shadowed alcove, his manner transformed from diplomatic restraint to smug confidence.
"I truly wished to avoid this messy scenario, but your election was an unfortunate mistake in galactic history, Exav." "Betrayal? I expected that from you, but how did you convince the guards?"
Exav demanded, his tentacle hair flaring with anger.
"Simply introduce them to the future of security," Exnok replied. "These guards represent the culmination of previous administrations' most classified research. Enhanced soldiers, designed for unwavering loyalty and unmatched combat effectiveness."
Thomas studied the guards with professional assessment. "The artificial adrenaline you were concerned about," he concluded. "You've done to them exactly what destroyed those 3 civilizations."
"With improvements,"
Exnok corrected.
"The former president authorized controlled dosage and conditioning protocols to overcome the madness that affected previous test subjects. This research was inspired by your kind, human."
Exav moved toward an emergency communication panel on the wall.
"This ends now. I'm calling security." "These are security,"
Exnok reminded him with false pleasantness.
"And the strategic story will be that a human went berserk, killed our beloved president, and was neutralized by loyal guards."
Without warning or attempt at diplomacy, Thomas launched at the nearest guard, striking his throat with great force. The guard staggered but recovered with unnatural speed, his expression unchanged despite the blow.
"Kill the president first,"
Exnok ordered sharply. One of the enhanced guards moved with shocking speed to smash the communication panel before Exav could activate the emergency signal.
"Their strength and fearlessness makes them the perfect weapon,"
Exnok commented with professional pride.
"Unlike humans, they don't waste adrenaline on."
Exnok's lecture was cut short as Thomas exploded into action. Exav watched the human faint left, causing the first guard to shift his weight. Then, with startling speed, Thomas drove his shoulder into the guard's midsection with devastating force. Exav winced at the sound of impact, like stone striking metal. The enhanced guard's breath whooshed out, eyes widening in momentary surprise as he staggered backward. His boots squealed against the polished floor as he slid several steps back. Exav noted with fascination how the guard remained standing when any normal being would have collapsed, clear evidence of the artificial adrenaline's effect. Before Thomas could fully recover his stance, Exav saw the guard counter. The enhanced soldier's face contorted into a grimace of rage, the first real emotion Exav had observed. As he launched a haymaker with bone-shattering force, Exav's tentacle hair tensed involuntarily as he watched Thomas react, evading to his right. When a kick from another guard came simultaneously, the human dropped and ducked with perfect timing. The guard's fist missed Thomas by mere centimeters and slammed into the wall panel behind. The reinforced material buckled with a shriek of protesting metal. Sparks erupted from fractured circuitry as the guard's knuckles brushed through the wiring beneath. Blue-tinged blood spattered from the guard's torn skin. Yet, Exav observed that his expression showed no pain recognition, another disturbing sign of the enhancement's effect. "They can't feel it," Thomas realized aloud, rolling sideways as the guard wrenched his damaged hand free from the wall. A second guard lunged at Thomas with unnatural speed. The human moved with astonishing grace, sidestepping at the last possible moment. The president had never seen such precise timing from any species. Thomas seemed to anticipate the guard's movements before they fully manifested. As the guard pivoted and swung wildly, Thomas ducked beneath the blow. Egzav noticed how the human's eyes tracked every movement, processing information at a rate that seemed impossible. Thomas then struck at the guard's knee, causing a momentary falter in the enhanced soldier's stance. What impressed Egzav most was Thomas's economy of movement. No wasted energy, no madness in his technique, just pure efficiency as the human positioned himself perfectly inside the guard's reach. With a subtle shift of weight and perfect timing, Thomas redirected the charging guard's momentum. The enhanced soldier, unable to adjust its trajectory, slammed into the corridor wall with bone-crushing force of his own making. Egzav heard the sickening impact as the guard collapsed, defeated by his own enhanced strength turned against him. Meanwhile, Egzav faced his own attacker. The president delivered a sharp punch to the guard's midsection, then used the guard's forward momentum to propel him into the opposite wall. The impact left the enhanced soldier stunned despite his chemical enhancements.
"Aim for the balance points,"
Egzav called to Thomas, recognizing the enhanced guard's weakness in coordinated movements. Thomas nodded sharply, positioning himself so the two remaining guards would have to approach from slightly different angles. As they attacked, he dropped to the floor, rolling beneath their reaching arms. Unable to adjust their trajectories quickly enough, the two enhanced soldiers collided with bone-crushing force. The final guard, recovered from Egzav's strike, charged Thomas with berserk intensity. His movements were powerful, but telegraphed. "Too predictable," Thomas muttered, waiting until the last possible moment before pivoting sharply. Grabbing the guard's uniform, he used the guard's own momentum to drive him face-first into the wall. In less than a minute, all four enhanced guards lay neutralized. Thomas stood breathing heavily, a small cut above his eye dripping blood, but otherwise composed. "Your super soldiers are strong, but stupid," Thomas told Exnock, who stood frozen in disbelief. "Adrenaline doesn't just give humans raw strength, it enhances our perception and reaction time." Exnock's expression of confident superiority crumbled as he watched his enhanced soldiers fall one by one. His face contorted with desperate rage as he reached into his formal attire, fingers closing around a concealed disruptor pistol, a weapon strictly forbidden in presidential spaces. The metallic weapon emerged with a venomous hiss as its safety disengaged automatically upon drawing.
"This ends now,"
Exnock snarled, raising the weapon toward Egzav's head. The president's reaction defied every assumption about his species' capabilities. Egzav's body seemed to liquefy in motion. His tentacle hair flattened against his skull for streamlined movement as he propelled himself forward with explosive force. Before Exnock could squeeze the trigger, Egzav was upon him. The president's right arm swept upward in a precisely calculated arc, striking Exnock's wrist at exactly the point where nerve clusters controlled fine motor movement. The disruptor discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as Exnock's fingers spasmed involuntarily, sending a shower of sparks and melted circuitry raining down around them. Egzav followed through, his left palm connecting with Exnock's sternum, with enough force to drive the air from his lungs. His right fist connected with Exnock's jaw, the impact snapping the advisor's head sideways with an audible crack. A second blow caught Exnock in the solar plexus, doubling him over. The third, a precisely targeted strike to the temple, sent Exnock sprawling to the floor, blue blood streaming from his split lip and nostrils.
"I don't need adrenaline to handle such a small fly,"
Egzav said, contempt evident in his voice as he straightened his presidential attire.
"Though I admit, more than one punch was required without it."
He stepped deliberately on Exnock's fallen weapon, crushing its firing mechanism beneath his heel with a satisfying crunch. Security personnel arrived, weapons drawn. Egzav quickly took command.
"Restrain former advisor Exnock and provide medical attention to these guards. They're victims of illegal experimentation. I want a full investigation into this enhancement program." "This confirms my decision,"
Egzav told Thomas once the situation was secured.
The emergency council session will address both the misclassification of human biology and the illegal weapons program. The galaxy deserves truth on both counts.
3 days later, Galactic news networks carried unprecedented coverage of the Council's emergency session. The lead story featuring a former president and several high-ranking officials facing justice for authorizing illegal biochemical experimentation. Secondary coverage explored the revised classification of human biology, with scientific experts explaining how natural evolution had created what artificial manipulation could only dangerously mimic. In his private chamber, Exav watched the reports with satisfaction, his reform agenda vindicated by events that had nearly cost him his life. The philosophical question that had troubled him since discovering the classification had been conclusively answered. Biological capability alone didn't determine danger. Intent and evolution mattered more. His tentacle hair moved in patterns of contentment as he drafted a formal invitation for Thomas to join a new interspecies research initiative. Knowledge had indeed proved more powerful than